It all started with a monologue, one of those snarky late-night routines that had become all too predictable. On a Wednesday night in early April 2025, Seth Meyers, host of Late Night with Seth Meyers, decided to end his show with what he called a special parody of the Trump White House Daily Briefing. A segment crafted to mock the newly appointed White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt. It was intended, as he claimed, to be just comedy. But for millions watching, especially conservatives and Trump supporters, it didn't land as innocent satire. Instead, it came across as a low blow laced with disdain. The sketch featured an actress with exaggerated makeup, fake eyelashes, and an over-the-top New Hampshire accent pretending to be Karoline. She stood behind a White House press podium in front of an obviously fake backdrop, rolling her eyes and shouting aggressively at fake reporters. The lines were filled with sarcasm. "I don't know what the Constitution says, I just know what President Trump says. And that's better. Next question, but only if it's from ONN or my Aunt Sue watching from Manchester." Even the fake Karoline's wardrobe, a flag print dress with glittering MAGA earrings, was clearly designed to mock her patriotism. The audience laughed. Twitter, now TruthNet under the Trump administration, erupted. But Karoline Leavitt? She didn't laugh. She didn't tweet. She waited. And when she stepped behind the real White House press podium the next morning, America watched the transformation from press secretary to culture warrior, live, unscripted, and devastatingly effective. The cameras were already rolling when Karoline adjusted the microphone and gave a poised smile. There was a palpable tension in the room. Everyone had seen the Seth Meyers spoof. Everyone wondered if she'd even mention it. She didn't start with a joke. She didn't lash out emotionally. Instead, she pulled out a printed transcript of the late-night skit. Last night, she began, a multimillionaire television host who's never stepped one foot in a White House briefing room decided to mock not just me but the millions of Americans I represent. She held the transcript up. This isn't comedy. This is elitism wrapped in a cheap laugh track. Reporters leaned in. Phones were lifted. The room buzzed. Karoline didn't stop. It's funny to them because the idea of a young conservative woman from New Hampshire standing up here is absurd to their Manhattan echo chamber. But guess what? I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. Fox News was already running her speech live. Clips would soon dominate conservative media, but it wasn't just the base watching. By the end of that press briefing, Karoline didn't just respond, she owned the moment. She slammed Hollywood hypocrisy, pointed out the double standards, how left-leaning female politicians were celebrated for speaking their minds, while conservative women were mocked for doing the same. And then she delivered the knockout line. "Seth Meyers pretended to be me last night. But he'll never understand what it takes to be me. Because standing here every day isn't a performance. It's public service." Boom. CNN cut their feed mid-sentence. MSNBC scrambled to fact-check. But the truth was, the clip had already gone viral. Hashtag Karoline Claps Back was trending. Even neutral viewers found themselves asking, had Seth Meyers gone too far? That night, Late Night aired again, but Meyers didn't have the last laugh. The stage was set. And Karoline Leavitt was just getting started. As Karoline Leavitt stepped away from the podium, her message continued to reverberate far beyond the White House press room. Within hours, conservative commentators on radio, podcasts, and YouTube were flooding the airwaves with reactions. Tucker Carlson, now running his own media empire, devoted an entire segment to Karoline's takedown. "You're witnessing the rise of a new kind of press secretary," he said. "Not just informed, not just articulate, but bold, unafraid, and most importantly, someone who isn't afraid to confront the media class directly." Charlie Kirk called it an absolute masterclass. Candace Owens tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt just turned Seth Meyers into a political footnote." Brutal. Even non-political influencers took notice. The clip spread to Instagram, Rumble, and even TikTok. People weren't just reposting it, they were remixing it, analyzing it, celebrating it. The contrast couldn't have been more glaring. A late-night host mocking Karoline with a sneering impersonation versus the real woman standing tall at the podium, composed, sharp, and unapologetically American. Meanwhile, in New York, the production team behind Late Night with Seth Meyers was caught off guard. The spoof had been intended as a throwaway bit, just another jab in the nightly barrage of anti-Trump comedy. But Seth Meyers hadn't expected a full-blown cultural counterpunch. That morning, ratings analysts were in a frenzy. Viewership in red states had cratered overnight. A sudden wave of sponsor calls started coming in, many from companies who quietly supported Trump-era policies but avoided political affiliations in public. They weren't pulling out yet, but they were asking questions. Seth sat in his office, coffee in hand, scrolling through reactions on his phone. "She's milking this," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. But even he couldn't deny it, Karoline Leavitt had struck a chord. And not just with conservatives. Even some moderate viewers were expressing fatigue with the endless comedy jabs masquerading as news. To his credit, Seth decided to respond. That night, at the top of his show, he looked directly into the camera. "So apparently, the new White House press secretary didn't like our sketch. I guess someone missed the comedy part of the title." The audience gave a polite laugh, but it was forced. He pushed through. "Karoline Leavitt says I don't know what it takes to do her job. And that's fair, I've never had to pretend the president's tweets make sense." A few more laughs. But they were nervous. Something about this didn't feel like victory, it felt defensive. And then came the real mistake. Seth doubled down. He aired another clip, not a parody this time, but a mashup of Karoline's past Fox News interviews edited to make her look unhinged, intercut with laugh tracks and clown music. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a smirk, "your taxpayer-funded TikTok influencer." But this time, the reaction was swift and not in his favor. Karoline fired back with a 2-minute video posted directly from the White House lawn. No script. No teleprompter. Just her, the American flag, and the truth. Seth Meyers thinks this is about him. It's not. It's about the people who feel mocked every time the liberal media tells us we're backward, outdated, or a joke. I may be young. I may be conservative. But I know this, when someone mocks you for standing for your country, that says more about them than it does about you. The video gained over 30 million views in the first 48 hours. Suddenly, this wasn't just a PR moment. It was a cultural battle. And Karoline was winning. By the weekend, the Leavitt versus Meyers showdown had evolved into something much bigger than a media spat. It was no longer about just one spoof sketch or a fiery press conference. It was a collision between two Americas, one that lived on the coasts, lounged in green rooms, and mocked patriotism for sport, and another that still flew the flag proudly, believed in tradition, and wanted their voices heard without being laughed at. And right in the middle of that cultural crossfire stood Karoline Leavitt, who had unwittingly become the new face of conservative resistance against media elitism. Back in her hometown of Atkinson, New Hampshire, locals were organizing a Karoline watch party for her next press briefing. A local bakery sold cookies in the shape of microphones with red, white, and blue frosting. Churches prayed for her strength. Even high school students, some of whom had once thought politics were boring, were tuning in to see what their hometown hero would say next. Meanwhile, the mainstream media tried to minimize the damage. NBC attempted a soft spin with a segment titled "Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary who can't take a joke?" But the effort backfired as conservative influencers like Megyn Kelly and Benny Johnson tore it apart on social media. "They're trying to gaslight us," Kelly posted. Karoline didn't start this fight. She just finished it. A deeper shift was happening too, one that frightened legacy media. Americans were no longer laughing with Seth Meyers. They were laughing at him. Clips of his latest failed punchlines were being stitched into YouTube videos with titles like "Seth crumbles under pressure" and "Karoline broke him." Comedians on the right, like Ryan Long and J.P. Sears, began mocking Seth for being unable to take criticism, calling him the softest man in late night. Even within the entertainment world, dissent was bubbling beneath the surface. Tim Allen tweeted, "Remember when comedy used to punch up at power, not down at Americans who love their country? Just saying. Rob Schneider followed up, "Karoline Leavitt is what happens when you push good people too far. Keep poking. It won't end well." But Karoline wasn't done yet. On Monday morning, she invited military families, veterans, and small business owners to stand behind her at the next White House press briefing. The optics were powerful, normal, working-class Americans flanking a poised, fearless press secretary who had become their voice. And her message? Devastatingly simple. Seth Meyers thinks it's funny to mock faith, family, and patriotism. But these people behind me? They're not punchlines. They're the backbone of this country. She turned slightly toward the cameras, her voice calm but cutting. Late-night hosts don't fight wars. They don't build businesses. They don't sacrifice for this country. These people do. Her words echoed through the room. There were no interruptions. No sneering questions. Just silence and awe. Even liberal outlets like The Atlantic began acknowledging the shift. One op-ed admitted, "Karoline Leavitt may be the most effective communicator the Trump White House has ever had." And ironically, Seth Meyers helped her become that. She didn't need to attack Seth anymore. He had become irrelevant. And for someone like Karoline Leavitt, nothing said victory louder than silence from the other side. Just when the mainstream media assumed Karoline would move on and let the headlines fade, she surprised them again. This time, not with a speech or a press conference, but with a stroke of pure cultural jiu-jitsu. Karoline announced a special press briefing edition, a one-off segment titled The Real Late Night, Truth After Hours, filmed late in the evening from the White House briefing room, styled with a dramatic patriotic backdrop, and live-streamed directly to over 15 million followers across X, Rumble, and Truth Social. Her team even added a faux studio audience applause effect at the beginning, cheekily mocking late-night show gimmicks. The title cards flashed on-screen in the same retro font Seth Meyers used on his show, Good Evening, America. Karoline began with a smile, standing confidently behind the podium. Tonight, we're going to try something radical, the truth. Unfiltered. No laugh tracks. No scripts from woke interns. The crowd watching online went wild. She broke down real policy wins under the Trump administration. Job growth, new manufacturing deals, veteran care expansion, all delivered in bite-sized, witty segments. Then she pulled out the zinger. Seth Meyers did a spoof about me last week. Called me Barbie meets Bunker Boy or something clever like that, she said with a grin. Now I don't know about you, but I'll take Barbie with a backbone over a late-night beta with a punchline problem. Boom. Twitter. On. Fire. Meme pages lit up. Hashtag beta with a backbone started trending, followed quickly by hashtag Karoline Unfiltered and hashtag late night meltdown. Even some liberals had to admit she was good. Too good. Comedians on the right offered praise. Greg Gutfeld said, Karoline just redefined late night. She's smart, fearless, and best of all, she's got better comedic timing than Seth Meyers on his best night. The left, however, was scrambling. Slate published an angry op-ed, When the White House Becomes a Comedy Stage, ironically ignoring the fact that their side had been doing that for years. Karoline responded to that, too, on her next briefing. I didn't turn the White House into a comedy stage. You did. I'm just showing you what it looks like when someone fights back. Inside 30 Rock, the atmosphere was tense. Ratings were slipping fast and sponsors were nervous. NBC executives started pulling sketches involving Karoline from the show's YouTube page, citing public backlash. Seth's monologues were beginning to sound desperate. He attempted a Karoline comeback skit only to have it bomb on air. Reviews were brutal. Meyers looks like he's trying to wrestle relevance back from a woman who lives rent-free in his head, one entertainment columnist noted. Even Saturday Night Live passed on a Karoline sketch that week, producers privately admitting they didn't want the smoke. Back at the White House, Karoline was unbothered. She was too busy turning the narrative into a political rallying point. For too long, she said in an interview with Mark Levin, the late-night crowd mocked middle America from their high-rise bubbles. But not anymore. We're flipping the script. This country belongs to everyone, not just the coasts, not just Hollywood, and not just cable news. Her messaging started showing up in Trump's speeches, J.D. Vance's interviews, and even on campaign flyers nationwide. Mocked by the left, backed by America, one read with a photo of Karoline standing strong behind the podium. She was no longer just a press secretary. She had become a symbol. The fallout from the feud had outgrown its comedic origin. By now, it wasn't just Seth Meyers on the losing end, it was the entire late-night genre that found itself reckoning with the rise of a new cultural reality. And Karoline Leavitt, the once unknown firebrand from New Hampshire, had ignited it. Inside the corridors of NBC and its late-night production staff, there was no more laughter, only crisis meetings. Seth went too far, admitted one anonymous staffer in a leaked internal memo. He underestimated how fed up America is with our condescension. That memo was published by the Daily Wire, and it went viral instantly. Seth Meyers' team scrambled to salvage what they could, booking him on podcasts and trying to reframe the issue as a misunderstanding. But Karoline's words had already resonated far beyond what any PR spin could fix. One particular line from her late-night live stream had been clipped into 1,000 TikToks, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. You can laugh at us all you want. But while you sip lattes in studio lights, we raise families, run businesses, serve in uniform, and fight for the country you mock. And now we're done being your punchline. That statement alone racked up over 90 million views. The next poll from Rasmussen showed a 13-point drop in trust toward late-night media among independents. Even some liberal-leaning outlets began admitting it was time for a comedy reckoning. And as for Seth, his approval among viewers ages 25 to 45 hit an all-time low. NBC quietly canceled his planned live tour. Rumors swirled that executives were considering rotating in guest hosts, something that hadn't happened since the early pandemic days. Meanwhile, conservative voices gained unprecedented cultural traction. Karoline Leavitt wasn't content with just winning the exchange, she used the attention as a springboard for something much bigger. On July 4th, she delivered a rousing speech at the Restoring Freedom Conference in Dallas, where she received multiple standing ovations. Her speech, titled The America They Forgot, touched on everything from faith, family, and education to the dangers of media manipulation. The crescendo came when she addressed the elephant in the room. They said I couldn't handle jokes. What they really meant was they couldn't handle truth. Because nothing scares them more than a woman who can think for herself, speak without fear, and still pray before every meal. That clip became the top political video on Rumble that week. Conservatives hailed it as the anti-woke Gettysburg Address. The Trump campaign leaned in hard, producing a documentary-style campaign ad featuring Karoline and titled The Fighter's Voice. It aired during prime time and was watched by over 10 million Americans in one night. Seth Meyers' last attempt at redemption came in the form of a televised monologue where he apologized if anyone took the joke too seriously. Karoline's reply? Another press briefing, short and sweet. This isn't about a joke. This is about the millions of Americans Seth and his crowd have laughed at for years. If they want a joke, fine. But we won't be silent while they disrespect what we cherish. She walked off the podium to thunderous applause. Seth didn't respond again. Not on Twitter. Not on his show. Not in interviews. He had finally realized. He didn't just lose a feud. He lost the narrative. Months later, Karoline was interviewed by Tucker Carlson in a long-form special titled, The Moment It Changed. He asked her if she ever expected a comedy sketch would lead to all this. Karoline smiled. I didn't go looking for this fight, Tucker. But I've learned that sometimes you don't choose the battlefield. The battlefield chooses you. And when it does, you don't back down. You fight. Not just for yourself, but for every American tired of being laughed at for loving their country. And with that, the former late-night target became something greater, a symbol of strength, a voice of conviction, and a reminder that truth, delivered boldly, will always outshine sarcasm whispered from a studio.